What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. Today we've got another fantasy football mock draft for you, this time through ESPN, and hopefully this will be a live mock draft with a full lobby. As you can see, we've got the setup ready to go here. People slowly joining. It is a 12-team PPR mock. We are drafting from the third overall slot, and we've got about 15 seconds here before we kick it off. And during that time, quick announcement, the ADP 2020 Fantasy Football Draft Guide is available to everyone at this point in time. Check out the description for all the details on how to get your copy now. For just $10, you will be able to have access to top 150 overall player rankings for standard and PPR formats, individual player projections, rankings, individual player bios, guys to target, guys to avoid, along with general fantasy advice. So again, check out the description for that. And if you enjoy, hit that like button, subscribe. And now let's get back to the draft because it is our turn to pick. The first two selections are off the board with Christian McCaffrey and Saquon Barkley. And even though here, pretty much every other time I would go either Ezekiel Elliott or Dalvin Cook or Alvin Kamara, we kind of know what the roster looks like if we do that. So instead, let's go with a guy in Michael Thomas, who, by the way, ESPN has ranked very high as the number 2 overall player, whereas I think that pretty much everyone is in agreement that it's Christian McCaffrey and Saquon Barkley 1 and 2 respectively, or in some type of order. But Michael Thomas here, the fact that he's number 2 for ESPN, a little bit surprising, but I guess in full point PPR formats, they are bullish on him repeating his success from last year. Either way, though, it's not a bad pick. The only thing that this means is that we're going to have to hit the running back position hard in the second and third round. It'll be tough because you have to find that balance of not necessarily reaching on a running back, but maybe that might mean foregoing a running back and actually going with a tight end or a wide receiver. We'll see how this thing plays out. It's tough to speculate at this point in time. The only thing that I can really confidently say is for all of you that are in a similar situation and you do want to go with Michael Thomas or another wide receiver early on, even though Thomas is pretty much the only choice at this point in time, if you're in a league where your league mates really value the running back position, don't be shocked if there's a run on those guys and all of a sudden when it gets back to you in the second round, you don't have that big of a selection in terms of good quality consistent RB1s, and instead you're left with some low-end RB1s that have some serious question marks or are in some type of running back by committee, or maybe it's even gone down to low-end, or I should say high-end RB2s. Again, that'll kind of depend on scoring formats and league sizes, things like that. But just a little caution for everyone that's kind of considering that. I mean, it can definitely pay off if things go your way, but at the same time, it can put you behind the 8 ball very quickly. And let's go back to the draft board here, to the big board. After our Michael Thomas selection, you see Alvin Kamara. I have zero problem with that selection. Ezekiel Elliott drops number 5 overall. A bit surprising. Again, I'd have him over Alvin Kamara. Dalvin Cook afterwards. Hey, Joe Mixon with the 7th overall pick. I love the courage and the conviction to take Joe Mixon at that point in time because, again, if you're someone like myself and a lot of people out there that you believe RBs and truly elite RBs should dominate the first round, Joe Mixon, to some extent, he's in that category. He's not in the tier 1 group of McCaffrey, Barkley, Zeke, and Dalvin Cook, and maybe even Kamara, but he's in that next group. Now, the only question mark with Joe Mixon is, what are you going to get from Joe Burrow? What's he going to do for the value of the big names in Cincinnati? Joe Mixon being the primary one, but you have to like what the Cincinnati offensive line should look like if they remain healthy. That's going to be a big boost. And Joe Mixon is someone that's just waiting to break out. He's got so much potential as a pass catcher. It hasn't quite been unlocked, but man, if that clicks this year, he could have a breakout type of season. So I really like that Joe Mixon selection, actually. Then you see Davante Adams. I believe ESPN had him as their number 2 wide receiver. I don't necessarily disagree with that. I'm just looking at the patterns and what the coaching staff and their selections, especially in the NFL draft, are telling us, and what their philosophies and how they kind of ran game script towards the end of last year. And if I'm someone that's observing the Green Bay Packers, it's kind of clear to me that they want to have a run first type of offense, similar to what the Tennessee Titans did. And for that reason, how big will Davante Adams' involvement be? Maybe not as big as it could be otherwise, but in the same breath, you could also make the counter argument that since the Packers didn't add really any notable wide receivers opposite of him, that he's still going to be just fine. So I understand both sides of the argument. Personally, I would have Julio Jones above him. I have him as my number 2 wide receiver, both in standard and PPR formats. I just absolutely love the Atlanta offense and the fact that they play in the NFC South. I think Julio Jones is going to have another great year. Then you see DeAndre Hopkins here being selected after Davante Adams, and I anticipate the next 3 selections here, 10, 11, and 12, will probably be Julio, then Tyreek, then Derrick Henry. It seems like we have got a slew of auto picks here in a row, as you can see. So hopefully some of these guys return, and if not, we'll kind of cycle through these picks kind of fast. We'll see how long this draft takes, because we don't want to stay here forever. We're going to go ahead and make the core of our roster so we can still go ahead and give it a grade, compare it to some of the other rosters, things like that, and that everyone can kind of get something out of this experience. As always, no worries there. But right now, let's look at the running backs that we're likely going to be selecting from. Aaron Jones, I mean, I'm not a fan of. I've been on record saying that I think he's going to be the biggest bust and the biggest regression candidate for 2020 compared to last year. But at the end of the day, if he's there for me at the end of the second round, I'd still go ahead and take him. Beggars can't be choosers in that situation. He's still going to have some type of RB1, even though it's probably low-end RB1 production. But I'm just thankful he just went with the first selection in the second round. And then Lamar Jackson with the second pick in the second round. I think that's the highest I've seen Lamar Jackson go. That is absolutely ludicrous. Look, I know he just set the fantasy world on fire, but folks, we saw it last year now, albeit it kind of happened because of injury with Patrick Mahomes not repeating his success from the season in 2018. But there will be natural regression for the Baltimore offense and for Lamar Jackson. I don't anticipate the same type of success. And even if he's just as good, guys, the running back and the wide receiver position, both of them are more valuable than the quarterback position. Patrick Mahomes is someone that's going to be very comparable to Lamar Jackson. In fact, we just released our top 10 overall quarterback rankings for 2020, and we actually have Patrick Mahomes slightly ahead of Lamar Jackson. Now, sure, maybe that'll be subject to change as we get closer to the start of the season if there's something happening on those respective offenses. But if things stay the way that they are, we still believe Patrick Mahomes is the guy that you should be targeting. And the fact that he'll probably go a round later than Lamar Jackson, in it of itself, presents very good value for you guys. Then you see Chris Godwin, Mike Evans right after one another in selections. I actually really like that, because if you compare it to some other platforms, you'll see Mike Evans go between 5 to 8 picks after Chris Godwin, which is absolutely crazy. I still very much so believe that they can both be top 10 fantasy wide receivers in whatever format you're in. So for that reason, I don't think that Mike Evans and Chris Godwin should be separated by that much. In fact, I actually have Mike Evans slightly higher than Chris Godwin. That could probably come down to personal preference, but I'm personally someone that has Evans a little bit higher. I think he's got some higher touchdown potential, and for that reason, I'm going in his favor. Then you saw Kenyon Drake go, Leonard Fournette. A little bit surprising to see Leonard Fournette go that early, considering that someone like an Austin Eckler was still there. But hey, I'm not going to go ahead and complain, because it is our selection, And we've got some good choices here. We've got Nick Chubb, we've got Josh Jacobs, we've got Miles Sanders, then even Todd Gurley, David Johnson afterwards. So what I'm going to do here is it's going to come down to Miles Sanders, Josh Jacobs, and Nick Chubb. And since this is a full point PPR format, I actually have Miles Sanders ranked above Josh Jacobs and Nick Chubb. I'm going to go ahead and stay true to my board here and go with that selection at this point in time. So we're going to go ahead and pick Miles Sanders here. I know that these next two picks are probably going to be Chubb and Josh Jacobs in that order, as you saw, because of, auto picks, but I'm all right with it. We're staying true to our board, and that is very important. Don't get me wrong, if this was a standard league, I would absolutely go with Chubb or Josh Jacobs. And honestly, this came down to Sanders and Jacobs because Nick Chubb, I just don't like as far as pass catching upside with Kareem Hunt still there. So for that reason, it was Miles Sanders for me. I think he's a better pass catcher than Josh Jacobs. And you know that his volume is going to be much higher than what it was last year. But let's go back to our big board here. We've got pretty much three names that we're going to be considering: Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Todd Gurley, and David Johnson. And I'm going with the player that's on the most high-octane offense. To me, that is Todd Gurley with the Atlanta Falcons. I actually think that him switching teams, being cut by the Rams and being picked up by the Falcons was a blessing in disguise for his value. And I think he has top 15 RB potential. So let's go ahead and go back to our roster. We started with Michael Thomas, and then we added Miles Sanders and Todd Gurley. I actually don't mind how that turned out. Now, maybe you could go ahead and say that the roster would have looked a little bit better if we went Nick Chubb or Josh Jacobs. And again, I'd agree with you guys if this was standard formats, but since it's full point PPR, I've got Miles Sanders slightly higher above both those guys. With Kareem Hunt still in that backfield with Nick Chubb, I can't quite go ahead in good conscience put him as high as some other people. So for that reason, I'm staying true to the big board. I continue to say it, and I advise you guys to do the same. If you are going by a certain set of rankings and you've got a group of running backs that maybe some are bigger names than the other, but your rankings and your projections tell you to go with maybe the less popular name, I'd go ahead and do it. These projections, they're well thought out, and it usually goes in your benefit if you follow the projections and if you go by the numbers, and that's what we're doing here. But let's go back to this pick history, because this thing really sped up here with all these auto picks after our Todd Gurley selection. You see Patrick Mahomes, and like we told you, a whole round later than Lamar Jackson. That's incredible value. Juju Smith-Schuster afterwards, Allen Robinson, Devin Singletary. In my opinion, way too early to be taking Devin Singletary. I do think the addition of Zach Moss kind of hurts his value. Amari Cooper, great value for Amari Cooper in the third round. Clyde Edwards-Helaire going towards the end of the third round. I think that's more so where he should be going. And even with the news that Carlos Hyde signed with the Seattle Seahawks, I'd actually still have Chris Carson above Clyde Edwards-Helaire, because I think you can make the argument that every single rookie that was drafted wound up in some type of running back by committee, obviously to a different extent, but it still exists. Then Courtland Sutton, then David Johnson with the first pick in the fourth round. I think that honestly might be the best value pick that we've seen so far. He's got very high upside, David Johnson does. One of the best running backs that the Houston Texans have had in a long time in David Johnson. And obviously he wasn't effective last year due to injury, but the injuries he struggled with these last couple of years, none of them have been all that serious. So that's at least a little bit of an encouragement to go ahead and trust David Johnson. But I do think his mid to high end RB1 days are over. He's probably a low end RB1 to high end RB2 at this point in time, but the ceiling is higher because of his pass catching abilities. And if you're getting him in the fourth round, you're probably getting him as as your second running back, or maybe as your flex running back. So keep that in mind. Then you see Raheem Mostert, Le'Veon Bell, Melvin Gordon, Keenan Allen, Robert Woods, Tyler Lockett, Odell, and Calvin Ridley. And we are back on the clock here, and I already know who we're going to go ahead and get. We can go ahead and go wide receiver, and I'm definitely considering someone like Cooper Kupp here. I might go ahead and actually do that right now. I could risk it and see if James Conner is there for us in the 5th round. I'll go with Cooper Kupp here because I think Kupp and Michael Thomas are a very strong duo of wide receivers. And let's see if James Conner is still available. And he is. I think that is tremendous right now at this point in time. He is our flex running back here, folks, in the 5th round. And he's a starter in Pittsburgh behind a great offensive line with a healthy Big Ben. James Conner will get the volume. He stays healthy for the majority of the season. He's a top 15 running back. I fully believe that. So maybe we benefited from the fact that all these auto picks are taking place here and that ESPN, along with a lot of other platforms, have James Conner ranked lower than he should be. But we're going to go ahead and take advantage of it. I really like how this roster is playing out. You know, even though we've gotten lucky with some picks, nothing has been all that crazy. You know, Michael Thomas, you could argue that we reached on with our first selection. Then going Miles Sanders and Todd Gurley, both of those usually go around that point in time. Cooper Kupp is probably the one that was a little bit shocking to see because he has top 10 wide receiver potential. And for that reason, getting him in the 4th round, pretty good value. James Conner in the 5th round, I think it's very good value, but that's around the ADP that he's been going. So go ahead and capitalize on that. He is extremely undervalued right now. So I absolutely snatched him up. And this is going to speed up again here in a little bit after these auto picks start going. Stephon Diggs was just selected, and unfortunately David Montgomery right afterwards. I was actually going to go ahead and pick Montgomery if he was somehow there in the 6th round, but unfortunately he was just picked. Then you see Mark Ingram. I'm surprised to see Stephon Diggs still go that high. Honestly, wouldn't be shocked at the end of the season if Diggs and John Brown have very similar stats, and maybe John Brown outperforms Stephon Diggs because the Bills, well, first and foremost, they're a run-first team. Josh Allen also does a lot of rushing himself. He's still not quite as accurate as he could be. And for that reason, I think Stephon Diggs is definitely not going to have the same type of success that he had last year. But let's look at some of these other selections after that. Mark Ingram, he's someone that I'm really not touching at all after the selection of J.K. Dobbins. He's getting older. He wasn't an every down back last year. There were so many touchdowns in 2019. You know there's going to be touchdown regression. Then you see Jarvis Landry. You see Darren Waller. I would have definitely liked to see Darren Waller fall to me in the 6th round. Didn't quite happen. DJ Shark, Debo, Michael Gallup. Same thing with Devontae Parker. Would have loved to have Devontae Parker as my 3rd wide receiver. Very good value. Mark Andrews. Surprised actually to see Mark Andrews go this late in this mock draft. Again, it's tough to really pinpoint how much to say this is due to auto picks, but I somewhat agree with this because first and foremost, his value is bigger in standard formats, but considering the year he's coming off of, he's usually the 3rd or 4th tight end off the board. You see DK Metcalf, Deshaun Watson. Talk about a quarterback that's seen his value plummet after the departure of DeAndre Hopkins, but I think that's appropriate. Let's look at some of these other names that are left for us to really select with AJ Green, Jonathan Taylor, Ronald Jones. You know, the Tampa Bay running back situation does have a lot of upside, but unless you really know who that guy is going to be, it's tough to confidently pick one of them. But if the Bucks do commit to one of those guys, then you know it's going to be a very interesting situation because they're going to have in that offense. It's going to be a lot of potential, a lot of upside. But right now, we're back on the board. I'm really between 2 selections here in AJ Green and Kyler Murray. And what I actually want to do, since this is getting pretty late into this draft, I want to start kind of putting together the core of our roster. So I will go ahead and pick Kyler Murray here at the end of the 6th round. I actually have him as our number 3 quarterback for this season. But for the sake of, like I said, filling out this roster, I'm going to go quarterback. And here, probably going to go tight end. And I'm a believer in Evan Ingram. He stays healthy. You saw it last year. He's got top 5 tight end potential week in and week out. So I'm going to go ahead and get him here regardless. And if, again, if we were doing the entire draft at this point in time, Evan Ingram would be my selection here, and I think it would be very good value. So I really do believe in that pick. So let's go ahead and look at this roster because we have filled out the starting roster. We've got Kyler Murray, Miles Sanders, Todd Gurley, Michael Thomas, Cooper Kupp, Evan Ingram, and then James Conner. And honestly, this might be one of the best mock drafts that we've gone ahead and put together. Just speaking of the starting caliber of the roster, we'll see what we can do with maybe our bench. We'll go 2 deep or maybe 3 deep depending on how long this takes and the process in it of itself. A wide receiver that I really like here is Brandon Cooks. I'm not sure if he's still available. Let's go ahead and check. I see that Will Fuller is available. A lot of people have Will Fuller as the #1 wide receiver for the Houston Texans, but I continue to say that I believe it should be Brandon Cooks. And as you can see, he's ranked 95th overall, 21 spots lower than Will Fuller. I think he's the most talented, the most veteran wide receiver. And if you're saying, well, he's got injury concerns, well, every single wide receiver for the Houston Texans has injury concerns. So to me, that's almost a non-factor. He's going to be our next selection after this. But let's just go ahead and look at the quarterback situation. If we didn't go Kyler Murray, maybe that was a little bit of a forced pick. I really like the talent in the NFC South, like I mentioned before. Matt Ryan, Drew Brees, Tom Brady even. I wouldn't mind having either one of those guys as my starting quarterback. Tight end, I'm happy I landed Evan Ingram where I did. I'm also very high on Jack Doyle. I continue to say that. But again, Evan Ingram, I do have higher than Jack Doyle, so I don't mind taking Ingram here. But wide receivers, I love Michael Thomas. I love Cooper Kupp in PPR formats. You know that Kupp is going to be inconsistent, but that's why, we can kind of go ahead and rely on Michael Thomas. He is the model of consistency. Running backs, we went Sanders, we went Gurley, we went James Conner. There is risk there. But again, when you go wide receiver that early in the first round, you have to get some riskier running backs that have high ceilings, and that's what we did here. So we'll go Brandon Cooks. Let's look at some of these selections afterwards at the running back position. I'm curious to see how ESPN has these rankings playing out. Marlon Mack, Phillip Lindsay, Sony Michel. Sony Michel might be interesting if it was a standard format, but he loses so much value in PPR formats. So for that reason, I'm not really going to be looking his way. And at this point, it's all backup running backs. You see Lindsay, you see Breida, you see Murray, Boston Scott, Zach Moss, Damian Williams. It's tough sledding here at this point in time. You can make the case for a handcuff, but I think it's still way too early to do that. And for that reason, we'll just go ahead, stay true to who we had queued up, and go with Brandon Cooks unless he's selected here with this pick right before us. Let's look at some other alternative possibilities. I actually don't mind Jamison Crowder as a target hawk in the Jets offense. I realize that the Jets offense isn't going to be all that exciting, but Jamison Crowder, I think, can be a steady force for them. I think he's going to be the #1 target for Sam Darnold. But we don't even have to go that direction. Brandon Cooks is still available to us, so I'll go ahead and get him right now. And honestly, I'd feel all right having Brandon Cooks as our starting flex play. So to me, he's a starting caliber type of guy. So I like that selection there. Let's go ahead and make one more pick here. You see Golden Tate, you see Christian Kirk, Deontay Johnson. A lot of people are very high on Deontay Johnson as, as a sleeper, as someone that's going to have a big year after the performance he had in 2019 following the injury to Juju Smith-Schuster. I'm not quite 100% sold on that, but let's go with someone that has upside, in my opinion. I'm going to go ahead and go with Golden Tate because we know that he has PPR upside. We know that some of those offensive weapons for the New York Giants tend to get hurt. To some extent, Golden Tate is the most reliable wide receiver that the Giants have, so I'm going to invest a pick in him. It's not a sexy pick. He's getting a little bit older, but he's a proven veteran. So I don't mind selecting Golden Tate there. And we can go ahead and maybe queue up a couple of names and wrap this up because we've gotten into the 9th, 10th round and the majority of people here are on auto pick. So let's go ahead and look at some of these quarterbacks. You know, Matt Ryan's still on the board. Drew Brees still on the board. I'll just queue up Matt Ryan just for the heck of it. I think it's just very good value at this point in time. You know, he won't be there for us. He's going to be selected afterwards. But let's look at the tight ends. Like I told you guys, Jack Doyle is someone that I'm high on, so I can go ahead and queue him up since, you know, Evan Ingram does have some injury concerns, so getting another tight end does make some sense from that perspective. Let's look at running backs, though, because we've kind of addressed the wide receiver situation, so now we can go back to running back, and it would make sense to go ahead and add Boston Scott as a handcuff to Miles Sanders, so I will queue him up. Out of all these other guys, Damian Williams is probably the name that I'd be most excited about because I do believe that with all the rookie running backs being drafted, they're in somewhat of a disadvantage right now, being separated from their teams and all these kind of virtual meetings and situations. So maybe they have a slower start than normal, and Damian Williams, for at least a good portion of the beginning of the season, actually does better than some expect. And again, he does have upside from the fact that he's on the Kansas City Chiefs offense alone. So other than that, we're ready to wrap this thing up. I really like the way our roster turned out. I'm probably going to go ahead and say this is a B+ type of roster. All things considered, we did get a little bit lucky, I think, with some of these auto picks. So keep that in mind. Probably in reality, we shouldn't have been able to land Cooper Kupp. Probably got a little bit lucky with James Conner as well. But again, it's a good exercise to see what kind of situation you might find yourself in if you go wide receiver early. So make of that what you will. And as always, let me hear it in the comment section. Did you agree, disagree, with these picks? What are your thoughts about going wide receiver early? What do you prefer, along with any other fantasy questions you might have? And again, another quick reminder, go ahead and get yourself a copy of the 2020 ADP Fantasy Football Draft Guide now. All the information is in the description. And as always, if you guys enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in future videos.